My brother told me Dad had given him the motorcycle before he died. So stop watching what I take, he snapped. I backed off until I found it listed for $8,500. Then one date on his seller profile changed everything. We knew it was coming eventually. He had been sick for a while, and during his final weeks there had been more appointments, medications, and quiet conversations than any of us wanted to acknowledge. But knowing someone is dying and actually losing them are completely different things. By Thursday afternoon, my parents' house was full of relatives, neighbors, flowers, food, and questions none of us felt ready to answer. Which funeral home? What day would the service be? Who still needed to be called? Had Mom eaten? Where were Dad's insurance papers? Mom spent most of that first day at the kitchen table. Sometimes she answered people. Sometimes she just stared past them. At one point, someone asked what kind of flowers Dad liked, and she looked at me like she'd forgotten how to answer. So I started handling whatever I could. Phone calls, food, paperwork, relatives, anything that kept Mom from making another decision. My brother handled grief differently. He started organizing. That's what he called it. Dad's garage had always been crowded with things he'd collected over the years. Good tools, fishing equipment, boxes of spare parts, an old amplifier, a few collectibles, 2 watches he cared about, and in the back corner, an old motorcycle he'd been slowly restoring for years. The motorcycle had almost become part of the house. Every summer, Dad would uncover it and say, "This is the year." Every winter, it would still be there. He wasn't in a hurry. He liked working on it. Sometimes my nephew would sit in the garage with him while Dad explained what he was fixing, even though my nephew was probably too young to understand half of it. That's why I noticed immediately when the motorcycle disappeared. It was Saturday. We needed extra folding chairs for relatives, and I went into the garage to get them. The back corner was empty. The cover had been folded and left on the workbench. I stood there for a few seconds before going inside. My brother was sitting on the couch looking at his phone. "Where's Dad's motorcycle?" He barely looked up. I took it. "Where?" "My place." "Why?" He sighed. "Dad gave it to me." That surprised me. Before he died? Obviously. I didn't like his tone, but Dad had been gone for 2 days. Mom was barely functioning. A motorcycle seemed like the least important thing in the world. So I said, okay. The next morning, I went back into the garage looking for an extension cord. One of Dad's rolling tool cabinets was open. Half the drawers were nearly empty. Dad didn't buy cheap tools. He researched everything, waited for sales, kept receipts, and took care of what he owned. Some of those tools had been there since I was a kid. I found my brother outside. "Did you take Dad's tools too?" "Some." "Which ones?" He looked at me. "Why are you keeping track?" "I'm not. I'm asking because the cabinet is half empty. Dad said I could have them. All of them." He shook his head. "Why does this matter right now?" Before I could answer, Mom walked in. She had clearly heard enough. "Please. Not now." She looked exhausted. That ended it. Monday was the funeral. Most of it is still a blur. I remember sitting beside Mom. My brother was on her other side. My nephew stared at the floor through most of the service. People hugged us afterward and said the things people say when there isn't anything that can make the situation better. Dad was a good man. He's at peace. Call if you need anything. By the time we returned to the house, all I wanted was for the day to end. Relatives stayed for a while. Eventually people started leaving. I was in the kitchen cleaning up when I looked through the window and saw my brother carrying 2 boxes toward his SUV. Something about it bothered me. Maybe because I'd already noticed the motorcycle. Maybe because of the tools. Maybe because Dad's funeral flowers were still sitting in the living room while his belongings were already leaving the house. I walked outside. "What's in those?" My brother stopped. "Seriously?" "I'm just asking." "No. You're watching me." "I'm not watching you." "You asked about the bike. Then the tools. Now these." "Because Dad's things keep disappearing. I'm helping Mom clear stuff out. Mom hasn't gone through any of it. She doesn't want to." "Did she tell you that?" He loaded the first box into the SUV. "Why are you making this such a big deal?" "I'm not. I just don't understand why everything has to leave right now." He shut the back hatch. "Dad told me what I could take. Everything." He stared at me. "So stop watching what I take." For a second, I wanted to keep arguing. Then I looked toward the house. Mom was standing inside. That was enough. "Fine. I went back in. For almost 3 weeks, I stayed out of it. Whenever I visited Mom, I noticed something else missing. Fishing rods. The amplifier. A watch from Dad's dresser. A few things from the garage shelves. I kept reminding myself that Dad might really have told my brother what he wanted him to have. My brother had been having money problems. I didn't know exactly how bad they were, but I knew Dad had helped him before. Maybe Dad had decided to help him again. I didn't like the timing, but grief makes people behave strangely. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. Then my cousin sent me a screenshot. Her message said, "Isn't this your dad's bike?" I opened it. Dad's motorcycle filled the screen. Same unfinished restoration. Same scratch near the tank. Same parts he'd spent years collecting. Listed for $8,500. I read the description twice. It said the bike had been in the family for years. It said the seller was sad to let it go. Dad had been dead 3 weeks. I called my brother. He answered normally. "Hey, why are you selling Dad's motorcycle?" There was a pause. "How did you find that?" "That's your question?" "Dad gave it to me." "You told me he gave it to you. You didn't say you were going to sell it. What difference does that make?" That answer changed something. If Dad had specifically told him he could sell the motorcycle, he could have said so. Instead, every answer avoided the actual question. "Did Dad know you planned to sell it?" "It's mine." "Did he know?" "I don't have to explain myself to you." Then he hung up. I sat there staring at my phone. Until that call, I had been trying to believe him. After it, I wasn't sure I could. I didn't call Mom. She was still having rough days, and I wasn't going to accuse her son of something unless I had more than suspicion. Instead, the next time she was out visiting family, I went through Dad's office. Mom knew I was looking for some of his paperwork. Dad had always been ridiculously organized. He labeled folders, saved receipts, kept appliance manuals years after most people would have thrown them away. If Dad bought a toaster, there was a decent chance he could find the receipt 5 years later. I opened the filing cabinet. Insurance, taxes, medical, utilities. Then I remembered something. A few years earlier, Dad had changed homeowners' insurance companies. The new insurer recommended documenting valuable household items in case of theft or damage. Dad took that suggestion seriously. He spent an entire weekend photographing anything he thought mattered. Serial numbers, tools, electronics, collectibles, the motorcycle. At the time, we made fun of him for it. I remembered asking why anyone needed 6 pictures of an unfinished motorcycle. Dad told me, "You document things before you need the documentation." I checked the desk, then the lower cabinet. Behind a stack of old folders, I found a binder. Home inventory. Of course, he had typed a label. I sat in his chair and opened it. The first pages were ordinary. Televisions, furniture, appliances. Then came electronics. Dad's amplifier was there. Photo, serial number, purchase date, estimated value. Then the tools. Page after page. I recognized several that were already gone. Fishing equipment came next. Then the watches. Beside one photograph, Dad had written 3 words in pen. "For my daughter." That was me. I stopped. For a moment, the issue with my brother disappeared. I just stared at Dad's handwriting. He had written those words while imagining a future where he wasn't there. Then I turned the page. The motorcycle. Dad had photographed it from every angle. He had listed the work he'd completed and the parts he'd bought. At the bottom, he'd written, "Do not sell until restoration completed. Would like grandson to have someday." My nephew. My brother's son. Dad hadn't intended the motorcycle to become quick cash. He wanted it kept for his grandson. I knew the note wasn't automatically a legal instruction, but it completely contradicted what my brother was doing. I photographed the relevant pages and went home. Then I opened the marketplace listing again. This time, I clicked my brother's seller profile. The motorcycle wasn't the only thing. Dad's tools were there. Fishing equipment. The amplifier. 2 collectibles. What looked like one of the watches. Some listings were active. Others were already marked sold. I started taking screenshots. Then I noticed the dates. One item had been posted the day after Dad died. Another 2 days later. A tool set had been listed on the morning of the funeral. I stared at that one. While Mom and I were preparing to bury Dad, my brother had been writing marketplace listings. Then I saw another date. Wednesday. Dad died Thursday. I checked it again. Wednesday. The listing was for one of Dad's collectibles. The pictures had clearly been taken inside Dad's garage. I recognized the workbench behind it. My brother hadn't simply started organizing after Dad died. At least one item had been advertised while Dad was still alive. That didn't automatically prove Dad hadn't approved it. Maybe he had. But now I needed answers. I added up the visible sale prices. More than $10,000. And the motorcycle hadn't even sold yet. I called Mom. Can I come over? Something in my voice worried her. What's happened? I need to show you something. There was a pause. Is this about your brother? That question told me she already knew something wasn't right. I went over that evening. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table. I placed Dad's inventory binder in front of her. She recognized it immediately. Oh, that thing. I opened to the motorcycle. Did you know Dad wrote this? She read the note. Her expression changed. I said, he's selling the motorcycle. Mom didn't answer. Mom? I know. That caught me off guard. He told you. A few days ago. And you're okay with it? I didn't say that. Then why didn't you stop him? She looked tired. I don't want another fight. He's already selling Dad's things. Your brother is struggling. I know. More than you realize. That still doesn't mean he can take whatever he wants. She pushed the binder slightly away. Maybe your father told him he could. Then why did Dad write that he wanted the motorcycle kept for his grandson? Mom looked at the page again. I handed her my phone. There's more. She scrolled. The tools. The amplifier. The watch. The fishing equipment. Then she reached the listing dated Wednesday. She looked up. Your father was still alive. I know. Maybe he agreed to that one. Maybe. I wanted to be fair. But did Dad ever tell you he was giving all of this to him? Mom didn't answer. Did you? She put the phone down. I told your brother he could take some tools. Some tools. Yes. What about the fishing equipment? He asked about a few things. The amplifier? No. The watches? No. The collectibles? No. The motorcycle? No. There it was. Whatever permission my brother had been given, it wasn't permission to take everything he'd removed. Mom became defensive. Why did you have to go looking for all of this? I wasn't expecting that. Because things were disappearing. Your brother needs money. This isn't about who needs money. He has a child. So life isn't always equal. Then she said something that hurt more than I expected. Your brother needs the money more than you do. I don't want the money. You know what I mean. No, I really don't. You aren't in his position. This isn't about me getting a share. Then why are you involved? Because Dad wrote down what he wanted. That isn't his will. She was right. Dad's inventory wasn't a will. His actual will left most of his personal belongings to Mom. There wasn't some complicated inheritance plan. Mom inherited the property and had the right to decide what happened to it. Dad's handwritten notes showed what he wanted, but they didn't automatically override the will. So I asked the question that actually mattered. Did you give him permission to sell all of this? Mom looked away. No. Then that's the problem. She rubbed her forehead. I cannot do this right now. Her voice cracked. I'm trying to figure out how to live in this house without your father. That stopped me. I wake up and forget for 5 seconds that he's gone. Then I remember. Every morning. I reached across the table. I'm not asking you to fight with him tonight. I'm asking you to decide what you want before everything is gone. Mom started crying. Then she said quietly, I can't lose my son too. I understood. She wasn't talking about death. She was afraid confronting my brother would drive him away. After losing Dad, she couldn't handle another person disappearing from her life. We sat there for a while. Eventually, Mom agreed that nothing else would leave the house until she had spoken with the attorney handling Dad's estate. She called my brother. Less than 10 minutes later, he called me. He didn't say hello. What did you tell Mom? I showed her the listings. You went through my account? Your seller profile is public. You've been spying on me. No. I've been watching Dad's belongings show up online. They're mine. Mom says she only gave you permission to take some tools. Dad gave me the rest. Then why was one item listed before he died? Silence. I waited. Finally he said, because he wasn't going to use it again. My stomach dropped. That's not the same as him giving it to you. You weren't there for every conversation we had. Then tell Mom what Dad said. I don't have to prove anything to you. I'm not asking you to prove it to me. You're the one causing this. No. I'm the one who noticed. His voice rose. I have bills. I have a kid. Dad knew that. I know. He helped me before. Then maybe he would have helped you again. But that doesn't mean you could decide for Mom. He wanted me to have that stuff. What about the motorcycle? What about it? His inventory says he wanted your son to have it someday. My son? Exactly. So it's staying in my family. Not if you sell it to a stranger. He went quiet. Then he said, my son needs a father who can keep the lights on more than he needs an old motorcycle sitting in a garage. For the first time, I hesitated. Because that wasn't a ridiculous argument. If he was behind on bills, I understood why an $8,500 motorcycle looked less important than household expenses. But it still wasn't his decision to make. Then you should have asked Mom. He answered immediately. She would have said no. Silence. I don't think he meant to admit that. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. Then he hung up. Mom met with the estate attorney the following week. She asked both of us to come. There was no dramatic reading of Dad's will. No courtroom. Just a small conference room, Dad's paperwork, the inventory binder, and the three of us sitting across from the attorney. The attorney explained the situation plainly. Dad's inventory documented his possessions. His handwritten notes could show what he hoped would happen to certain items. But the binder wasn't a replacement for the will. Because Dad left his personal property to Mom, she had authority over most of it. My brother leaned back slightly. Then the attorney continued. That didn't mean my brother was free to remove or sell property without Mom's authorization. Anything sold without her permission needed to be accounted for. The motorcycle hadn't sold, so it should be returned until Mom decided what she wanted to do with it. My brother said, Dad gave me the motorcycle. The attorney asked, do you have anything documenting that? No. Did your mother authorize you to sell it? No, but Dad gave it to me. The attorney stayed calm. Unless there's evidence ownership passed to you before your father's death, your mother's authorization matters. My brother looked at me. You happy now? I didn't answer. The attorney asked him for a list of what he'd taken. My brother said he didn't have one. I opened my folder. I have screenshots. His expression changed. I had printed the listings. Not because I wanted to humiliate him. I wanted dates and amounts in front of us because arguments about what people remembered saying weren't getting us anywhere. I slid the pages across the table. The attorney looked through them. Then he reached the listing dated Wednesday. This was posted before your father died. My brother immediately said, Dad knew. Mom looked at him. Did he? Yes. What did he say? He knew I needed money. That's not what I asked. My brother's jaw tightened. Mom tried again. Did your father tell you to sell that? He said I could deal with some of his things. Which things? I don't remember the exact conversation. Mom looked down. Nobody needed to say anything. She knew him well enough to recognize when he was avoiding an answer. The attorney simply told him that nothing else should be sold until Mom approved it. Anything he still had needed to come back. Money from unauthorized sales needed to be accounted for. My brother stood up. This is ridiculous. Mom looked at him. Sit down. He froze. She hadn't used that tone with either of us in years. He sat. She said, your father hasn't even been gone a month. I needed money. I know. He knew. I know you talked to him about money. Then what's the problem? Mom stared at him. Why didn't you ask me? He looked away. Why didn't you ask me before you sold these things? Silence. Finally he said, because you would have said no. That was the moment something changed in Mom. Up until then, she could still tell herself it was grief, confusion, or some misunderstanding about what Dad had said. But my brother knew she hadn't approved what he was doing. He just didn't want to hear no. 2 days later, he brought the motorcycle back. Mom had to call more than once, and I suspect the attorney's involvement helped. My brother arrived with the motorcycle strapped to a trailer. My nephew was with him. He watched while his dad unloaded it into Mom's garage. Then he asked, why is Grandpa's bike coming back? Nobody answered immediately. Mom finally said, because Grandpa wanted it kept safe. My nephew touched the seat. Was Grandpa going to finish it? My brother said, eventually. Can we finish it? My brother looked away. I said nothing. Dad had specifically thought about that kid when he wrote the note. He had imagined his grandson getting the motorcycle someday. My brother had almost sold that possibility without his son ever knowing it existed. Over the next week, more things came back. Several tools. Some fishing equipment. a box of motorcycle parts, and one of Dad's watches. The watch marked for me. My brother put it on Mom's kitchen table. There. Then he looked at me. Happy? No. He laughed. Sure. I'm not happy about any of this. You got what you wanted. What I wanted was for Mom to have the chance to decide before everything disappeared. You wanted to prove I was doing something wrong. I wanted you to stop. He shook his head. You've always thought you were better than me. This has nothing to do with that. Easy for you to say. You weren't the one behind on everything. I would have helped if you'd asked. I didn't want your help. So you sold Dad's things. His face hardened. I took things he would have wanted me to have. I looked at him. Then why were you afraid Mom would say no? He didn't answer. I stopped arguing. The things already sold couldn't all be recovered. The amplifier was gone. Several tools. Fishing equipment. 2 collectibles. When everything was added up, my brother had received a little over $14,000. He had already spent some of it. Mostly on ordinary expenses. Bills. Debt. Household costs. Mom believed him. So did I. That complicated my feelings more than I expected. He hadn't sold Dad's belongings to fund some ridiculous lifestyle. He was financially drowning and had convinced himself that Dad would have wanted him to use whatever was available. Understanding his reason didn't make his choices acceptable, but it made them human. Mom decided she wasn't going to demand the entire amount immediately. She worked out a repayment arrangement with him for the sales she hadn't authorized. That was her decision. I stayed out of it. My brother stopped speaking to me. Not gradually. Immediately. At family gatherings, if we were both there, he'd talk around me. He told relatives I had turned Dad's death into a fight over old junk. He said Mom wouldn't have cared until I made it a problem. Some relatives agreed with him. A few told me I should have let Mom handle everything herself. I understood the argument. The property had passed to her. But if I hadn't looked into what was happening, there might not have been much left for her to decide about. The part that bothered me most involved my nephew. One afternoon, he asked why I had tried to take Grandpa's motorcycle away from him and his dad. I knew immediately where he'd heard that. For a second, I wanted to explain everything. Then I stopped. He was a kid. He didn't need to be pulled into an adult fight. So I said I didn't try to take it. He looked confused. What happened? Your grandpa wanted you to have that motorcycle someday. Me? Yeah. Really? Really? Did Grandpa say that? He wrote it down. His face lit up. That was all he needed to know. 8 months have passed. My brother still barely speaks to me. Mom and I are okay now. A few months after everything happened, she asked me to come over. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd first shown her the listings. She said, I owe you an apology. You don't. I do. Then she looked down at her hands. I knew your brother was taking things. That surprised me. How much did you know? Not much. I knew about some of the tools. I noticed other things disappearing. Why didn't you say anything? She was quiet for a moment. Because I couldn't deal with it. Then she said something I've never forgotten. I was angry at you because blaming you was easier than admitting what he was doing. That explained more than any argument we'd had. If Dad had secretly given my brother everything, then there was no betrayal. If I was overreacting, Mom didn't have to confront another painful situation while grieving her husband. She went into her bedroom and returned with Dad's watch. She placed it in my hand. I think he wanted you to have this. It wasn't really my style. Still isn't. But I remember Dad wearing it. Whenever he worked on something messy, he'd take it off and set it somewhere safe. Then he'd forget where he'd put it. Once he spent 20 minutes looking for it before Mom pointed out that it was sitting beside his coffee. I laughed when I remembered that. Then I cried. I don't wear the watch often. Most of the time, it stays in its box. Its value doesn't matter to me. Dad chose it. That's enough. The motorcycle is still in Mom's garage. My nephew checks on it whenever he visits. A few months ago, I found him sitting beside it with one of Dad's restoration manuals open across his knees. He looked up. Do you think Grandpa really wanted me to ride this someday? I said, he wanted you to have the chance. My nephew smiled. Dad says it might never run. I laughed. Your grandpa heard that for years. He laughed too. For the first time since all of this started, the motorcycle didn't feel like evidence. It just felt like Dad's motorcycle again. I hope my brother eventually helps his son finish it. I really do. Whatever happened between us, he's still my nephew's father, and I don't want that bike to become a permanent reminder of why Dad's children stopped speaking. I want my nephew to know the grandfather who sat in that garage and imagined giving it to him someday. Maybe my brother still believes I betrayed him. Maybe he convinced himself Dad would have wanted him to sell those things because his family needed the money. Maybe he thinks I cared more about possessions than I cared about him. I can't control the version of the story he chooses to believe. What I know is that he began listing Dad's belongings before Dad died. He kept selling them while Mom was too overwhelmed to challenge him. And when she finally asked why he hadn't gotten permission, he admitted he already knew what her answer would have been. There wasn't a perfect ending. Dad is still gone. Some of his belongings are gone too. My brother and I barely speak. Mom had to deal with a conflict she never wanted. But one thing stayed. The motorcycle. Dad's notes stayed with it. And someday my nephew will get the chance his grandfather wanted him to have. Maybe he'll restore it. Maybe he'll decide he doesn't want it. Maybe years from now he'll sell it himself. But when that day comes, it'll actually be his choice. That's all I wanted. So was I wrong for digging into what my brother was selling and pushing my mother to confront it while she was grieving? Or did my brother cross the line the moment he started selling Dad's belongings before we had even buried him?